Hi there, this is Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and today I'm going to be showing how I like to use mattress stitch to seam together two pieces of knit fabric. And I am going to be seaming together from cast on edge and cast on edge. So you'll see that my columns are actually going horizontal right now because I'm going to be joining them this way, instead of what you might have seen a little bit more traditional would be like this. So places where you might need to join your knit fabric like this, it could be the underarm of a drop shoulder sweater where you've had to cast on some additional stitches to the yoke before continuing after the separation. It could also be the top of a shoulder where you've bound off stitches and now you have to seam together the front and back. So I'm going to use the cast on edge here because that's where I most frequently need to use mattress stitch for this technique. You are going to want to use 3 to 4 times the length of what you're seaming. So I always lay my yarn down and then I will fold it 3 to 4 times to get that length. And then I'm just going to go ahead and thread that onto a tapestry needle. You also do want to make sure when doing any kind of seaming with your yarn, make sure that your yarn is strong enough for the seaming so that it doesn't break when you tug on it. If your yarn for your project is a little bit on the fragile side, maybe it was a woolen spun yarn, one that just you can kind of pull apart easily with your hands, you can always use a different yarn that is a little bit stronger, or even some embroidery floss. Most seaming is done so that it's invisible, so you won't see the yarn you're using, but just something to be aware of. All right, we are going to get started by doing a figure 8 join here to begin our seaming. So I want to go in the first 1 stitch in from the edge. So here's a full stitch here. That's actually my second stitch. If I rotate this a little, you'll see that is actually my edge stitch here. So I'm going to go from back to front and pull through the entire length of yarn I want to use for seaming, minus a tail to weave in the ends. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So here is my edge, and I'm going to go just 1 stitch in from back to front. And to create the figure 8, which you would see if I kind of rotated this here, I'm going to just go right back into where I started. So I'm going to follow that same path where I already have my yarn. And I'll just bring that right through. There we go. So now we are joined up and ready to start seaming. So for an underarm, I like to go stitch to stitch. Sometimes you can offset by a little bit to help them line up, but these two pieces are never going to perfectly line up because we have our stitches going into different directions, which is how it's going to be at the underarm of your drop shoulder. So I find stitch to stitch is just a really simple way to get it done. So I like to go right at the base of the very first stitch next to my cast on edge. So I pull my yarn through, and then I need to go do the same over on the other side. All the way to the base here, going under both legs of the V of that stitch. And now to the other side, just going up 1, under both legs. And I'm just zigzagging back and forth, going up 1 stitch each time. I'm going to go back to the other side and do 1 more, and then we'll give it a little tug. So you can see there's my zigzag, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull. I actually like to even do it a little bit on both sides. There we go. So there is the beginning of my join. And if I flipped it over, you can see it makes this little seam. And I'm going to do that all the way up and zip it up. And then I'll share a little trick. When I am using this method, again, I'm just going back and forth, climbing one stitch at a time, right at the base next to my cast on. If I was doing this at the bind off, I would do it the same exact way. I would just be grabbing the top of the V. So it would be the top of your legs. Give that another little zip. The yarn I'm using is actually not the strongest yarn. I can pull it apart with my hands if I give a good enough tug. So that's why I'm every few stitches I'm giving my tug. If I waited till I was all the way up, then I have a higher chance of tugging and having it snap. So I don't like to wait all the way to the end. So here is just a little tip. If you are doing this method for the underarm of a drop shoulder sweater, so it could be for, let's say, the Weekender crew, that is one of my sweaters that uses this technique. I know that after I seam up my underarm, I am going to need to pick up stitches to knit my sleeve. So I would prefer to keep my seaming yarn attached to the ball. So now my yarn's already attached, ready for me to go and pick up stitches around my sleeve. And that's one less tail that I'm going to have to weave in later. So I start just like I did here. The body of my sweater would be here, and I just seam it up. This would end at the body of my sweater, and now my yarn's already attached. If you don't need that, then don't worry about it. This can be broken and you would weave in your end. But I just like to give that tip. If I can weave in one less end, I'm probably going to go ahead and take advantage of that. All right, so back to just zigzagging every other stitch all the way up. One V at a time. Giving a gentle little tug as I go. So I'm about halfway, so you can see, there we go. And it'll be like this at the underarm, so it's a really tidy way to join together your knit fabric. So I hope you found this helpful next time you need to seam some knit columns together, and happy knitting.